Hey everybody, welcome to our class today about birds. We'll give a couple minutes to allow everybody to join us. So just hang out and we'll get going pretty soon here. That's ready. Get in my bag, get my apron. Yeah, the burlap one. Yeah. I need some kind of logo.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Okay. All right, welcome everybody to our live stream. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Today we are talking about gardening for the birds. If you have any questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat as they come up. We will get to them as soon as we can. I am going to introduce our speaker today. This is James. He works on our diagnostics desk, also in sales. I'll let him introduce himself a little bit, but he is super great. So I will turn the time over to James.
Hello, everyone. My name is James. I work at the diagnostics desk over at Glover Nursery. I'm a horticulturist and an ISA Certified Arborist. I've been in the green industry for 7 or 8 years now. It's a lot of fun. I'll start with the caveat. I'm not an ornithologist, but I love birds and any way to support our local ecosystem. So I'm not going to know all the exact minutiae with bird-related topics, but when it comes to gardening for them, I will provide a lot of info for you. So we can go ahead and start the presentation.
And then you just share on YouTube.
Okay. Right.
This one.
Oh, there we go.
And then, yeah, just click that one.
Okay. So here we go. It's a presentation on birds. We'll talk about habitat, food, shelter, and other ecological substructures. So just how to support them, essentially. So the first part of this presentation, we're going to go over the why.
Give me 1 minute. It's
Not showing
it's
up.
not popping up on my end.
Okay. Says shrink this tab.
I don't know if that's just on me.
If anyone else in the stream can see it, please let us know.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, no, it's popping up. Okay. Just took a second.
We're good. All right. So, yeah, the first part of this, we're going to talk about the why. And then the last half of the presentation, we'll talk about how to do it. So, why do we want to support birds? It's not just that, they're pretty and interesting and fun to admire, but there's a lot of other aspects that go into it. and we'll also go over why birds are declining to begin with. So as you can see in this picture here, the Carolina parakeet. This John James Audubon, he did a lot of bird illustrations back in the day. This bird species is extinct. So believe it or not, in North America, we did have a tropical parakeet species that lived all the way up into the Carolinas and Virginia, but due to habitat loss, it's no longer extant, which is really unfortunate because, I mean, look, what a charismatic species that would be to have around. The primary driver of bird decline is habitat change and habitat loss. So development, resource extraction, there's a lot of things that go into that. That is definitely the primary driver. So sometimes they need our help to survive if their habitat is fragmented and changed. Habitat across the world has changed a lot, especially since the Industrial Revolution, because now we can clear land at unprecedented scales, and we can change it at unprecedented scales with all of our machinery that we have now. Typical urbanization and suburbanization leads to loss of habitat. What I mean by that is our typical method of clearing land for development and not preserving anything. If you've got 5 acres of land that you're going to develop, which not necessarily a bad thing, but if you clear it completely and then build on top, you don't leave any room for habitat. So if you can preserve habitat or, design that into the development plans, that makes a huge difference. So the typical way of doing things has led to habitat loss. Climate change, of course, further exacerbate the effects of habitat loss. Climate change just exacerbates everything when it comes to ecology and the environment, because species and habitats can't adapt quickly enough to it. The proliferation of invasive species, both plants and animals, has caused a huge impact. Invasive species are those that come from different geographic areas, and they don't have the same controls that they would in their native environment. So like Russian olive, for example, that's a species a lot of people have heard of. It's very, very widespread in the Intermountain West. Hence the name, it's from Russia. And there in Russia, it has all kinds of birds and insects and pathogens that help to keep it at a level that leads to balance in the ecosystem. When something like just that plant is introduced here and it doesn't have those controls, it can just proliferate, go crazy, outcompete native stuff, and cause a lot of destructive issues. So the introduction of plants and animals that are invasive has really caused some problems. The use of pesticides can directly harm birds, whether it's a poison bait that's going to kill them if they eat it, or something along those lines, or they can also indirectly harm birds. So persistent pesticides such as DDT, which thankfully is now banned, build up in the fat tissue, leading to birth defects and improper egg development. Other pesticides can be neurotoxic, so they can affect the way the birds navigate and fly. Like Silent Spring by Rachel Carson was a book written back in the 70s that kind of led to the founding of the EPA, and it really showed us the harmful effects of pesticides like DDT. So even if you're not using something that can directly kill birds, many other pesticides can indirectly harm them as well. So, like I was saying, habitat has changed a lot, and it's shifted the ranges and requirements of many species. So if you haven't seen a range map before, over here on the bottom of the screen, you can see the range map for the broad-tailed hummingbird. That's this little guy right here that I saw in Teutonia. Its summer range is much of the Intermountain West. You can see all of Utah they occupy. During the winter, they fly south to Oaxaca, Puebla, southern Mexico. And then there is a portion in between there that they can occupy year-round because the conditions are right for them. So with climate change and habitat loss, this is the current map. It may have looked very different back in the day. And there are many other species where maybe they don't migrate as much as they used to, or they have to occupy different areas. So it isn't necessarily outright loss of habitat, but it can change things as well. Sometimes human intervention can make or break a species' survival. in certain situations and ranges. So that's why you're all here, I'm hoping, is, figure out what you can do. Sandhill cranes back in the 1930s. Sandhill cranes are birds that can be 4 feet tall. They're huge. They're really, really pretty. In the 1930s, they did not exist west of the Mississippi. They were completely extirpated within that range, and only through bird protection, like the Migratory Bird Act, hunting regulations, were we able to help facilitate the sandhill crane occupying much of its former range. So now they're pretty common up in like Heber, Strawberry Reservoir, that area, whereas less than 100 years ago, they were completely gone. They didn't exist. So human intervention can make a huge impact. When I say extirpated within a certain range, like with the sandhill cranes, it means they don't exist in that area anymore. They're not extinct, but they're extinct in that particular area. Specialist species can be more susceptible to damage compared to generalists. So I'll talk about that more later in the presentation, but a specialist bird or insect or plant would be one that relies upon a particular geographic area. Maybe it relies upon a particular food source, that if that food source or that habitat is gone, then so is that species. So like some flowers are only pollinated by one particular insect, and that insect relies upon that plant for a food source. So if the plant becomes extinct, so does the insect, and vice versa. Generalists, on the other hand, will feed on or occupy a wide variety of habitats or food sources. So they're generally a little more resilient. Migratory birds are protected from direct harm under the Migratory Bird Act of 1918. So generally, with very few exceptions, you can't hunt migratory birds. There are absolutely exceptions to that that states will regulate, but generally you can't hunt migratory birds. You can't do anything that inhibits their migratory patterns, but they're still at risk due to habitat loss. And that's going to be kind of a repeating theme throughout the presentation. So if you get sick of me saying it, it's because it's really important. So why are we important here in Utah? We live in this really pretty state. We've got some really interesting features in our landscape that support a lot of birds. It shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that the Great Salt Lake is one of the most important habitats for birds, not just in the Intermountain West, but in the world. You can see birds flying as far from Tierra del Fuego, the southern tip of South America, and Siberia. So there's a huge portion of the planet that relies upon the Great Salt Lake as a place to rest, refuel, gather food sources, and breeding as well. Many birds breed around the Great Salt Lake. There are over 200 different species and 10 million plus individuals that fly through every year, which is a pretty mind-boggling number. Utah is far from the biggest when it comes to population numbers for humans, but for birds, it is immensely important, which is pretty amazing to me. It is the largest wetland habitat in the western U.S. by far, and it's one of the largest inland saltwater habitats in the Americas. There are a couple others in California. There was a really big one in California that's gone now. Much as like what's happening to our lake, it's shrinking over time due to water diversion. As a bird habitat and for humans, it is immensely important. So it's crucial that we preserve it as best we can. Any questions so far?
We are doing good. We've got a couple people joining us from Idaho and the Netherlands.
Oh, wow. All right. Sweet. Yeah. And much of what I'm talking about is Utah specific, but this is just general gardening for birds. So regardless of where you live, much of this will apply. So again, why should we care? Maybe you're not wild about birds. Some people are scared of birds. Regardless of your personal feelings about it, we have a responsibility as humans because we can make a big impact to preserve birds as much as we can. So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has found that bird populations in North America have declined by 30% since 1970, which is pretty wild. That's about 3 billion birds. That's a big number. That's a significant amount of just the people on our planet. Imagine if 3 billion people And, our numbers should decline by that much since the 70s. I don't even know if there were 3 billion people back in the 70s.
No, that's a crazy number.
Yeah. So they have declined precipitously. Half of all bird species are in decline. And then 1 in 8 bird species are at risk of extinction, which means if nothing changes, they're probably not going to survive for the next few decades. And again, habitat loss is the primary driver. That's a big thing I'm going to keep bringing up. So that's why even if you've got a small yard, any little piece of habitat can help support these creatures. Birds are extremely valuable parts of our ecosystems. They're connected to the food web in many ways. So other organisms will rely on birds as a food source themselves, or they use birds for seed dispersal, or they tie into a lot of things. They're kind of an indicator species for the health of a habitat in many ways. Seed feeding birds help to disperse plants. Plants can get dispersed hundreds of miles if there's migratory birds feeding on a particular plant. They drop it off later in their journey. So it really helps to support plant ranges as well. Insect feeding birds can help control populations of potentially deleterious insects. There are many, many birds that feed on insects only or as a large part of their diet or in certain parts of the year. So even just as a pest control option, birds can be excellent for that. Predatory birds, raptors like owls, eagles, falcons, so on and so forth, can help control populations of potentially unwanted animals or birds. So many vermin species like rats and whatnot. Birds are excellent predators of those, so they can really help to regulate the environment in a way that's favorable to us as well, even though that's not necessarily the goal of the birds. And predatory birds in the area can be a sign of a well-functioning ecosystem since they're at the top of the food web. Since there's a kind of a pyramid in a way of the food chain, plants are at the bottom, insects, smaller creatures, birds, and then many people say we're up at the top. Predatory birds need a very wide base in order to exist in a particular area, because it just keeps tapering up and up and up. So in order to have like an eagle or a hawk or a falcon in your yard or in your area, you need to have a pretty good ecosystem. So they can kind of tell you, give you a general idea of the health of the ecosystem in your area.
That just made me think of our Utah state bird, the seagull, and how it became the state bird. Was it crickets?
It was crickets or locusts.
I know, I always get it confused.
Something related there, but yeah, they helped to, they basically wiped out this plague of locusts that existed when pioneers were trying to settle in this area. And a lot of people wouldn't have made it if the seagulls weren't there, because those insects were doing so much damage. So that's a great example. Absolutely. Thank you. So native and endemic species rely on well-functioning ecology. So native organisms are those that have evolved in a particular area or in a particular habitat. Like seagulls, for example, Utah has a lot of cool natives, both with plants and animals, but there's also endemics. And this might not be a term many of you are familiar with. Endemic species only exist in a particular area. So like for example, the Tushar Mountains in kind of central southern Utah, there's a penstemon that only exists in that mountain range and nowhere else on the planet. So that is an endemic species to that particular area. There are many other examples of that, like on islands, there's endemic species, they only exist on that particular island. With birds and plants, even throughout Utah, it's the same idea. There's a lot of endemic and native species. And if they're endemic, generally they're pretty highly specialized. So they rely on other specialized species for survival, whether that's a flower relying on a bee, a bird relying on a particular tree as a food source. There's a lot that goes into that. So for example, specialized, like I mentioned earlier, specialized plant species might be pollinated by only one species of pollinator. So if one declines, they both do. There's a lot of orchids that do this, for example, that have relied upon only one particular species. So it all ties together. That's another thing that's going to be, I'm going to repeat ad nauseum is everything is connected here when it comes to the biosphere. So you can't impact one aspect without impacting another, for better or for worse. All native aspects of an ecosystem are valuable. This is really important. They might not directly benefit us, or sometimes they're even detrimental to, our resources or the aesthetics of your yard or whatnot, but all species have a right to exist just like we do. So sometimes you just need to change your threshold for what you're going to act on when it comes to damage in your yard from, grasshoppers or something like that. Even species that may be detrimental to us will benefit other species. That's a huge thing. There's no good or bad in nature. We need to look at it from a more nuanced perspective, because maybe something like grasshoppers, obviously they do a lot of damage in your yard. That's a huge food source for a lot of birds, for example. So yeah, it's not good for us, but it might be good for something else. So keep that in mind. And then upholding biodiversity and incorporating even small stretches of habitat are really important. Even if you've got a small yard, even if you don't have a yard, you're just growing some plants on your patio, every little bit helps. It really makes a huge impact, especially in urban and more suburban areas. There's the 30-20-10 rule. Have you heard of that, Emily?
I have not.
So this is something that you generally want to follow in your yard. This is something that like municipalities use when they're planting an urban forest. They try and plant no more than 30% of a particular plant family. So like the rose family, for example, which has a lot of stuff in it. It's not just roses, it's apples, pears, cherries, apricots, peaches, plums, nectarines, almonds, strawberries, potentilla, ninebark. There's a lot of stuff in that family. So you want to try and plant no more than 30% of a particular family. And I'll go into why. 20% of a genus, like maples. There are Norway maples, hybrid maples, big tooth maples. They're all in the same genus, which is kind of like you and your immediate family. You're all related. And then no more than 10% of a species or variety. For example, in the Salt Lake area, sycamores or London plane trees, immensely popular. They're planted all over the place. There's definitely more than 10% of our urban canopy is made up of those. And the reason why you want to follow this, regardless of the scale, is that more biodiversity can immensely help with habitat and whatnot for birds and other organisms. But the other big thing is resiliency. Many pathogens or insects might feed only on a particular group of plants. And if you make your yard or whatnot more biodiverse, it's going to be more resilient in the face of disease pressure. If you have 10 ash trees and they get a disease or an insect, all 10 of them die. Maybe you do 2 different species or 4 different species or 5, or you do everything. Every tree in your yard is different. That really helps with resiliency and habitat. And it's also a lot more interesting, I think. So that's a general good rule to follow. So what can we do to help? As you can see on this big picture right here, Leave the Leaves, that's one thing that helps. The Xerces Society is an invertebrate conservation group, so they help to conserve insects and their habitat. Even if you're not super keen on seeing bugs in your yard or whatnot, up above plants, insects are kind of the next level of the ecosystem. So without insects, everything else collapses, us included. Many organisms will overwinter in your leaves in your yard. So you don't necessarily need to leave them on your grass and smother your turf. You could just rake them up in your planting beds. That really helps a ton. And come spring, a good chunk of that will be decomposed and it'll feed your beds anyway with organic material. But just something as simple as that, leaving your leaves can make a huge difference. It's easier too. You don't have to bag it up and take it somewhere. Plant native and bird-friendly species. That's a big thing. The second half of this presentation will go over some of the how and planting plants. We are a Glover Nursery. We want to help you get new plants. It is a really important thing you can do. Another aspect is limiting use of chemical pesticides. Notice I don't say eliminate. Chemicals are a really powerful tool, and they can be used very effectively and safely. They shouldn't be the first thing you reach for, though. If you have a problem in your yard, you want to consider other aspects, like maybe you need to plant something else. Maybe it's a cultural control. Maybe you just need to prune it differently. Maybe it's mechanical. Maybe you just have to pull out those weeds before they go to seed. Chemicals can be used very effectively, but we want to be careful with them because they can also be quite dangerous for us and the ecosystem. So you don't need to eliminate, but it shouldn't be the first tool you reach for. Plant more trees. Maybe I'm a little biased, but I think more trees are always a good idea. They cool things down. They provide a lot of habitat for all kinds of organisms, not just birds. They raise your property value. They'll make your AC bill go down. They're just nice to be around. Leaving leaf debris in the fall, like I mentioned. One thing that can help a ton is minimizing bright outdoor lighting at night during the migratory season. So since we have such a huge bird habitat along the Wasatch Front, minimizing lights outside at night when birds are migrating can really help with how they navigate. So during the peak season, depending on the species, it's going to be part of fall, part of spring. You'll want to just minimize your outdoor lighting or have it pointing downward so it's not going up in the air. Bird safe windows are a big thing. Have you seen those before?
I haven't.
No. It's there are some that like commercial buildings will use where it's a polka dot pattern all over the window. So we don't really notice it, but birds see it, so they're not flying into it.
Okay.
Or like we even have these reflective stickers that you can put on your windows that are neat designs that you really won't notice too much yourself, but just the flashiness of it, bird vision, they notice those and they'll know, okay, I'm not going to fly into that area. One big thing too is keeping your cats inside. I love cats. I've got one. They do a lot of damage. Cats kill anywhere from 1.3 to 4 million birds annually, which is a lot. That adds up, and that does a lot of damage. You can still, give them some outside time, but make sure it's supervised, or put them in a catio somewhere they're gonna be protected, because that'll really help preserve the birds, and it's also safer for your cat too. And then learning more, which is why you're all here, right? How can we protect that which we don't know about and we don't care for? Hands-off conservation doesn't work. We have to be directly involved. Sorry, get some water. We have to be involved, and we have to know what we're conserving. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's something you're covering later, but what about like timing of pruning your perennials?
Yeah, that's huge. And I will talk about that.
Okay.
Yep. That's a really good point. We'll go into that. Okay, so here's some of the how and the what. Like, what do you do? We're not gonna just give you a list of plants, because one, you can look that up. Two, it's not very interesting. I'm gonna give you some general things to look for with plants, because there's many, many species that support birds in different ways. So there'll be some prominent examples of good stuff you can use, but I'm gonna help you learn how to know what birds are gonna like. So I'm gonna teach you to fish instead of giving you one. Big part here, plants with small red fruit evolved to be eaten and dispersed by birds. So we can see kind of a wide color spectrum. Insects see mostly in the ultraviolet spectrum. Birds see reds and warm colors really, really well. Those pop out a ton to them. So anything that's red in color is kind of a cue that this is something that birds might like, whether it's fruit or flowers. Of course, native is best, because then you're going to support the native birds in ecology. There's some birds in Utah that are obligately, which means they have to, or occasionally frugivorous, which means they eat fruit. It's kind of a funny word. So just as some examples, cedar waxwings, American robins, northern mockingbirds, ladder-backed woodpecker, tree swallows, house finches. That's a very small subset. But some of those birds only eat fruit, or that's a decent portion of their diet. There are also plants that attract insects, whether they be pollinators like bees and butterflies, or pests. Sometimes it's something that makes your plant look a little rougher, that will attract predators. And those predators are going to be birds or other insects, or sometimes other mammals. So some birds in Utah that are obligately, again, meaning they have to, or occasionally insectivorous, invade insects, are canyon wrens, hermit thrushes, red-breasted nuthatch, killdeer, roadrunners, mountain bluebird. Again, there's a lot of them. Those are just a few noteworthy ones. Many bird species will nest in trees and thickets. So not only providing the food source, but the habitat is crucial. Many plants are also bird pollinated, which is, I think, really interesting. Hummingbirds are the most important and some of the most noteworthy ones that you'll notice pollinating flowers. Reds, oranges, yellows, again, that warm spectrum is what really helps. And tubular flowers have evolved for bird pollination. So something like a trumpet vine, big orange tubular flowers, or many penstemons, those are a huge nectar source and for hummingbirds, for example. And when the hummingbirds come and visit them, their heads or their bellies get dusted with pollen. They visit another flower, pollination occurs. So it can be really helpful for the plants as well. And then a huge thing that's really easy is having a water source of some kind, whether that's a fountain or a bird bath nearby. Because if you get food and water in one area, they're much more likely to hang out. I just wanted to include this picture too, talking about hummingbirds feeding on milkweed flowers, because you can see it's not really a tubular bloom, but hummingbirds will still visit it. Milkweed is kind of famous for being the host plant for monarch butterflies and other butterflies, but they don't just support that one species. Like I said, it's all connected. Even something like milkweed, which you think of as kind of a butterfly plant, will also help hummingbirds and, of course, other insects. So here are some fruiting trees you can do. As you can see in this picture, red, it's small. This fruit's only about 1/4 of an inch or so, which is about the right size for many bird species to eat in one go. So crab apples, some people have a knee-jerk reaction, oh, that's a messy tree. There are a lot of newer ones that have fruit that's tiny and it doesn't fall off. So it's much cleaner. It's perfect for birds too. It's persistent fruit is what we call it. They're not messy. Crab apples are tough as nails. They're really pretty. They have some of the best spring blooms and fall color, and they're really easy to grow. They don't get huge either. A lot of these trees on this list don't really get that big, like 15 to 25 feet. Hawthorns are also excellent. That's the picture that I've got here. They're kind of related to crab apples. They're one of the last trees to bloom in the spring. So they'll bloom right around like late May, early June. The fruit is small. Again, it's persistent, so it's really not that messy. And some species taste really good. So even you can eat it. It's not just for the birds. Douglas hawthorn is an example of a native species. Service berries, one of the best fruits, hands down. They're one of my favorite fruits just to eat. They're delicious. They're like a blueberry with an almond flavor. They're really, really good. And they're prolific producers. Just like we like them, so do birds. Sometimes you have to fight the robins if you want to get any of the fruit because they are really attractive to other wildlife. They have an awesome fall color, really pretty spring bloom. One thing that's crucial is that they fruit really early. Their fruit ripens up in June, July. I'm eating ripe service berries right now. So as an early food source for those frugivorous birds, it's crucial. Many other fruits like the hawthorns, crab apples, etc., don't ripen up until later in summer and into fall. Choke cherries are an excellent one. They are either small shrubs or large trees, depending on the particular type. It's a native species here. Canada red is a really popular form that we sell at the nursery. It has really nice red foliage. It's about 25, 30 feet tall. The fruit is kind of astringent, which doesn't mean bitter. Some people confuse the two. It's astringent when it seems it kind of dries your mouth out. So it can be quite tasty. Aside from that, it can be really sweet. Choke cherry jelly and jam is a classic one for a viewer in Idaho. I'm sure you're aware of that. It's really popular in southern Idaho. Really cold hardy, really fast growing. And then there's also yews. Those are an evergreen species. So unlike the other ones, it is a conifer. It's not really a true berry, but it looks like one. We call it a berry. It's technically a cone. They keep their leaves. They're really durable. I think they're quite attractive. They are extremely shade tolerant, which is really cool. And the red flesh of the berry is the only part that is not cytotoxic. So you can't eat the leaves, you can't eat the seeds, but the flesh of the berry Birds love, and again, for humans, it's actually pretty tasty. It kind of tastes like honey. Just make sure you spit out the seed because you won't have a good time.
Have you tried them before?
Yeah, they're
Really?
great. They've got kind of a goopy texture, which not everyone's going to like, but they make a really good spread or just snacking on them.
Ooh.
And they hang onto their fruit well into winter, so it's a good, even if you're hiking or walking around in winter, it's a good food source for humans and birds.
Good to know.
Yeah, they're really cool. So here's just a couple of examples. There's like a crab apple in spring, a pink flowered form. See, it's very pretty. They bloom after they've leafed out, so you get kind of a green canvas for it to grow on. And as you can see from these pictures, they really don't get huge, so they can fit well into even smaller areas. Also got a picture of a Washington hawthorn in late summer. It's just starting to get some fall color. They are prolific producers of fruit, really attractive structure. I like these forms that have that multi-stem structure. That's kind of how you'll find them naturally. We also have some that are in a single stem form, so we sell both. There's options there. Here's a serviceberry. You can see the Utah serviceberry, tons of white flowers. Obviously, this thing is super drought tolerant. Look at the habitat here. It's just sagebrush steppe. So that's something you could plant that needs very little water. There's also other serviceberries that grow more in our mountains that can tolerate quite a bit of moisture. This Utah serviceberry is kind of a smaller form. And then there's the chokecherry. This is the western chokecherry. It's got these big, long flower spikes. They smell really nice. This particular one is also kind of a shrubby species, but there are chokecherries that are more of a tree. So those are some trees you can do. And now we'll talk a little bit about shrubs. Shrubs are just smaller. That's really the only difference. Roses do really, really well in Utah. One of the few plants that really doesn't need too much work to make work here. The best ones for birds are going to be the wild forms or the native forms. So instead of an English rose that's really, really full, has a ton of petals, those don't really produce rose hips very well generally. And the hips, small red fruit, keep that in mind. That's what really supports birds. So something like a woods rose, I'll show you an example on the next slide, is going to be a good form for them. The cultivars generally are grown for their flowers, so they don't really produce hips that well. Simple flowered forms, meaning they have 5 petals or so. It's much more of a simple open flower, are better for pollinators because they can access the pollen and nectar in there a lot more easily than something that has 100 petals that's just bursting and you can't even see the center. We've got at least a couple of native rose species here. Berry crops like raspberries, currants, grapes, blackberries, all that stuff. Excellent food source for birds. Unless you're growing fruit commercially, you're going to get more than you need. As I'm sure most people know, if you have grapes or anything like that, you end up giving a bunch to your neighbors or you have juice for the next 2 years. So you can afford to share some of it with the birds. Generally, we don't need all of it, right? Sumacs, that's what I've got here. Kind of an interesting structure. They're shrubs or sometimes small trees. They have really pretty fall color. They're super drought tolerant. They're salt tolerant, heat tolerant. They grow really well in tough areas. The small red fruit on here is really tangy and sour. It can make kind of some people call it sumac lemonade. You soak it in water. It's a really refreshing drink in summer. It's also a component of spice mix like za'atar. It's really popular in Middle Eastern food and Eastern Europe. But just by itself, it's quite good. So we have at least a couple species. There's the smooth sumac that's going to look like this picture here. And there's also the smaller skunk bush or fragrant sumac. I don't know why they call it skunk bush because it smells really good. It's kind of a citrusy scent. Have you smelled it before?
No.
Yeah, it's really nice.
I'll have to go smell it when it's in bloom.
It's a misnomer. Yeah, it's really pleasant. Elderberries as well are large shrubs that can grow almost anywhere. Sunny, shady, wet, dry, good soil, poor soil, doesn't matter. They get pretty big too. They can get 10 or 12 feet tall and wide if you let them. You can prune them to bits though, and they'll do just fine. And we do have cultivars that are smaller. Many people know of elderberry because it's good for you if you've got a cold or anything like that. They're also edible. Like the flowers are really popular in Scandinavian cuisine. The fruit's pretty good too if you process it. It's toxic if you eat a bunch raw, so beware. And we have at least a couple species here in Utah. So here's what I mean by simple flower. You can see it's open. You can see the middle of it. It's not clustered all the way to the point where you can't see anything. So simple flowers like that are much better for pollinators. And here's a rose hip. You can see small red fruit. That's what birds go for. If you've ever tried a rose hip, you'll notice it's just a thin layer of flesh and then it's chock full of hard seeds. That's perfect for birds. Since they have beaks, they're not chewing on stuff, they're just swallowing it whole for the most part. Doesn't matter if there's a bunch of seeds in there, they'll just gulp the whole thing down. It's a really good example of fruit that has evolved with birds in mind, so to speak. Here is a thicket of woods rose. This is a big cottonwood. You can see you've got aspens, it's relatively shady. You can see a bunch of the flowers in here are starting to bloom. They smell amazing. They're really, really fragrant. The flowers and the fruit are excellent for critters, but the shelter, that's an aspect I'll go into more. The fact that it forms this thicket is huge. It's really, really important as a protection for birds and other animals. That was an elderberry. You can see they get pretty big. That's probably a couple of plants in that picture, but they can be quite substantial. They smell really good. They are tough as nails. So we talked a little bit about fruit, and now we're going to talk about the dry fruiting species that form seeds. So a seed is technically still the fruit of a plant, even though we don't really think of it that way in a culinary sense. There's a few examples. Well, we'll talk about this guy first. Pinyon jays, really pretty little bluebirds. They've got a lovely call. They are considered vulnerable, which means they're not endangered, but they're kind of on their way. They're charismatic. I mean, I love the look of them. They're unique to the pinyon juniper forests, which are, they exist in the Intermountain West and parts of California, but not really anywhere else. So it's a habitat that we just have here, which is cool. And so if the pinyon juniper forests go away, then the bird goes away, right? 9-bark shrubs are really attractive in all 4 seasons. They're generally pretty tough. A lot of forms of it have dark color that's purple or red or orange. We have at least a few species in Utah. Maple trees have flowers and fruit that birds will eat. You might not think of maples as flowering because they don't have insect pollinated flowers. They have little tiny, usually kind of greenish flowers in spring before they leaf out. Lots of birds love to eat the blooms. They're chock full of nectar.
Really? They eat the blooms?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Pretty cool.
That must be nice because it is like really early.
Yeah, super early, like March is when those are flowering. So it's an excellent early food source. And then the fruit that maples form are also attractive to birds like finches and waxwings and chickadees. So, a lot of people think, I don't want a messy tree in my yard like a maple. It's got all those helicopters. Birds will eat them. Keep that in mind. They're not going to get rid of the seeds, but they can lower numbers if you let them. Fall color, of course, on maples is always excellent. We have a few species in Utah. Many conifers, such as pines, spruces, firs, produce seeds that seed eaters like. So think of a typical pine cone. When we see it, generally the scales that contain the seeds have already opened up. A lot of birds, like this pinyon jay, will get under those scales and eat the seeds before they open up or as they're opening up. So just the cones themselves can be an excellent food source. Junipers also produce kind of a berry-like structure that birds will just eat the whole thing. Generally, they take a year or 2 to ripen up. They smell really good. And then another underrated part that I want to bring to attention is that many herbaceous plants, meaning plants that are like smaller flowers, grasses that die back all the way to the ground, are also huge as a seed source. So like coneflowers, thistles, sunflowers, asters, many grasses make seeds that are eaten by birds. And then plants with plumes on their seeds can also be used as nesting material, like many of the grasses. Little blue stem, big blue stem. Really important just as nesting material. Same with other plants, of course, though.
I got a question for you from the chat. Do we have sparrows in Utah?
We do. Again, I'm not an ornithologist, but we do have sparrows. They're English sparrows, so they're an introduced species. They're kind of widespread throughout much of the world, actually. I've seen them here. I've seen them in California. I've seen them in Hawaii. They're very, very generous, so they eat a lot of stuff. I'm not necessarily anti-sparrow, but they're doing just fine. So we don't necessarily need to support them. Again, they're from England and Europe. Their habitat over there, I think, is generally pretty intact. It's the native species that really need a lot of help. And I don't know if there are other sparrows in Utah. There totally could be, but that's one that comes to mind. So check these out. These egret chicks, they're kind of funny looking birds.
So cute.
As an adult, they look pretty different. But when they're young, they look pretty funny. Snowy egrets rely on the Great Salt Lake. They nest on the ground near it. And so without the Great Salt Lake, no more snowy egrets. They're a really, really pretty bird. They can get pretty big. They need the Great Salt Lake. So perching shelter is the other big part of this. It's not just food. It's a place to hang out and a place to rest and breed. Perching birds require places to rest, nest, and forage or hunt. Trees are excellent shelter for many different species. More trees in your yard, always a good idea. Mature trees with a more open structure, like a big sycamore or spruce that's a little bonier as it has aged, is going to be excellent for like predatory species because they can get shelter and also fly out easily and kind of survey the surrounding area. Trees and shrubs with thorns provide protection for smaller species that can flit in and around a little more readily. So like barberries, hawthorns, locusts all have thorns. Thorns don't really affect smaller birds too much because their beaks and their feet are made out of keratin, like our nails. So they can navigate thorns just fine. It's not like mammals where we get torn up easily.
That's cool.
So it's really helpful for them. Suckering plants, those that have more shoots coming out of the root system, are very valuable. And those that form thickets, because they can be good for ground nesting species. Not every bird nests in trees. Many of them just hang out on the ground, and they're much more vulnerable there. So wild roses, like I mentioned that woods rose earlier, brambles like blackberries, raspberries, tall grasses, junipers, very important as a shelter. And one thing to consider is having an area of your yard that isn't super maintained. Maybe it's a little more wild. Maybe you don't mow over there as often, or you don't spray chemicals, or you don't, prune the trees over there as much. It's less work for us. Generally, areas like that are less disturbed are also going to attract more wildlife. So it's something to consider if you have a spot that's kind of annoying to get to, or maybe it's not irrigated as well. You just let it do its thing. Without just having a proliferation of weeds. Maybe you plant a couple of natives and you just leave it alone. So we'll talk a little bit about insectivorous birds and their diets. Caterpillars, which are the larval stage of moths and butterflies, like this little woolly bear here, cute little thing, turns into this Virginia tiger moth, really pretty moth, provide great upward mobility of trophic energy. If maybe you haven't taken a biology class recently, that doesn't sound like English at all. It's the general idea is in a food chain, you've got kind of different levels, right? Plants, insects, so on and so forth. Caterpillars are perhaps the greatest source of getting energy up that chain. So caterpillars are really juicy and full of nutrients for birds. It's going to be a much more preferred food source compared to, like a little piece of fruit or a seed or something. So they can really help just to move energy up that chain. So maybe when you see a caterpillar munching on your plants, maybe you don't need to spray it right away, depending on what it is. Leave it alone for the birds to eat. Like many caterpillars, like hornworms, will eat your tomato plants. Many insects have a stage that might be damaging to your plants, might make your plants look bad. Unless you're growing commercially, maybe your plants don't need to look perfect. We're not perfect. I don't expect my yard to be perfect. Maybe you can consider raising your tolerance level for damage. It's okay if part of a plant gets damaged, or maybe you don't get as much fruit on this particular tomato. Because that can provide an excellent source of food for other organisms. Pests can sometimes be a matter of perspective. Native insects provide food for other native beings. So if you have insects feeding on your plants, maybe it's going to be a food source for birds or other insects. Many beautiful butterflies, like the monarch here, has become more popular lately. Many people know that milkweeds are crucial for monarchs. These little caterpillars and the monarchs eat the plant. So it's kind of a destructive scenario for you. Your milkweed gets eaten to help support the monarch. So sometimes you'll let your plants get eaten by critters. It's not always a bad thing. Keep in mind too that insects acquire tolerance to chemical controls really rapidly, meaning even if you do want to get rid of them, if you're spraying the same stuff over and over, it's not always going to work forever. It's kind of like antibiotics. If a chemical control is effective, then you're depriving a food source from predators. Maybe you don't need to do. If less predators, less natural control. That's the other thing too. If you don't spray as much, the natural control can come in. Insectivorous birds are effective natural control. There are invasive plants that may need human intervention because, again, they don't have those system of checks and balances that I talked about earlier. So sometimes maybe we do need to control those because they might not have any natural predators. Some invasives rely on other invasives for survival. So we don't have these in Utah, but spotted lanternfly is a huge problem in the eastern U.S. It's very, very damaging. It causes millions of dollars worth of damage to crops. It kills a lot of trees. Their primary host is another invasive plant called tree of heaven, which in and of itself causes a lot of damage. So they kind of support each other there because they're both aspects of an ecosystem from another part of the planet. So sometimes helping to control the invasive plants can help to control the invasive pests. We're doing good on time?
Yeah, we're doing good. We got about 10 more minutes, so
Okay.
I think we're cruising. Just a reminder, if anyone has any ongoing questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat.
Pop in the chat. We'll answer as we go. Hummingbirds are really cool. Hummingbirds don't exist in the old world, meaning like Europe, Asia, Africa. Hummingbirds are native to the Americas.
Are they really?
Pretty cool,
Whoa.
huh? So, this is kind of a unique heritage that we have here that we really need to support. They did not evolve on the other part of the planet. So they're just in the Americas. Here's a picture of the broad-tailed hummingbird. Saw up in Teutonia. Caliber koa here is not a native plant, but birds, some of them are very picky, so it can be a good food source, even something like an annual. Hummingbirds subsist primarily on nectar. They metabolize really quickly, so they need something with a lot of calories, like nectar. It's basically just sugar. They also will eat insects because they still need protein and fats, but just having nectar nearby can help a ton. Again, flowers that are tubular are going to be their preferred form. Insects, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Insects see primarily in the UV spectrum, blues, purples, pinks. Red in warmer colors are going to be best for birds. So some plants that'll help support hummingbirds, salvias or sages, they come in a bunch of different colors. Agastache, hyssop, again, a bunch of different colors. Fire chalice or zauschneria is an excellent fall bloomer, late summer and fall. Tons of little red flowers, hummingbird magnet. Catalpas, nice big tree. Horse chestnuts or bug eyes, also a nice big tree. Honeysuckle vines, trumpet vines. Those are going to be vining, so you can grow them on a smaller structure. And again, even annuals like petunias and million bells can be helpful. And then having a place nearby where hummingbirds can perch and rest. So some plants even have perches built in, like agave. We have an agave here at our nursery that's flowering right now, and it's got these big long flower stalks that birds can also hang out on in between feedings, which is really cool. And then one thing that helps, of course, is ensuring that there's always something flowering throughout the season, so that there's a food source for a good deal of time. So some miscellaneous thoughts, and in short, more biodiversity makes a huge difference. More diversity of habitat too. Maybe you don't need to cultivate particular areas as intensively. Maybe chemicals aren't the first tool you reach for. Again, you can use them, but they shouldn't be the first tool. All of these things can help to support birds and other organisms because it's all connected. If you're supporting insects, you're supporting birds. If you're supporting any form of wildlife, you're ultimately going to support birds, and vice versa. If you support birds, you're going to support other things. So it all ties in. maybe you can consider removing some of your excessive lawn. There's a lot of lawn that you might not be using, like in your parking strip or in your front yard. Maybe you don't need as much lawn as you've got out back for your dogs or for your kids or anything. You can kind of reduce the area. Lawn really isn't that beneficial for birds. It can be, some birds will feed on little critters that hang out in the grass, but generally it's just not the best way to support them. We don't really need more lawn either. Of course, that helps to conserve water if you have less. Bird feeders, whether they be hummingbird feeders or you've got like a sunflower feeder, like a finch seed feeder, they're kind of a band-aid. They help provide food, but they're definitely not a permanent solution. One, because you have to maintain them. And if you don't have the food source anymore. And two, again, you need a diversity of food sources, not just one particular thing. So they can be helpful, but don't rely on them. Sources of water. This is huge. Fountains and bird baths. We've got some really nice ones here at the nursery that are worth looking into. If you have a bath with gently sloping sides, or you put like some rocks in the middle, will also support more insects, because then insects can get a drink and crawl back out, not get stuck. More insects, more birds. Plants with red flowers or red fruit support birds more than others. Again, some things are just ideal for birds. Crabapples, hawthorns, tomatoes and peppers too are a really good food source for birds. Those are prime examples of plants that evolved with birds in mind, so to speak. Your neighbors, maybe you convert your lawn to look more like this, something like what Red Butte has. I think it's a lot more interesting. It's a lot prettier. You don't have to mow it every week. You don't have to water it twice a week or 3 times a week. It's way less work, way less input. But yeah, it doesn't look like a perfect piece of green carpet. So maybe your neighbors don't understand it first. You can help educate them too. It's kind of crucial if the rest of the biosphere is going to make it. You need some kind of habitat. Even again, if it's a small patch, it's more fun. It's a lot less work. And again, like I've said, it's all connected. Tell birds you need to care for the ecology as a whole. You can't just do one part. You've got to consider everything that goes into it. Ecology as a science is relatively new. We really don't understand much. So we're still learning every day how connected it all is, because there's this web that we're just understanding as we live. So that's pretty much the presentation. I've got some reference slides here for anyone that's interested, where I got those numbers from, and then a little bit about me, arborist and horticulturist. So thank you.
Thank you so much, James. That was awesome. Here, I'll go ahead. I'll stop sharing a second. Let's get back over here. All right, we have a couple minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll see how many we can answer. Or also, if you come up with some questions later, or you're going through some plants, always feel free to give us a call or come stop on by. James is a part of our diagnostics team, and they are just super great with all the questions you can have. But yeah, I love that. I learned so much. That was so
Thank
cool.
you. Yeah.
I have some questions for you. Do you have a favorite bird?
I really like magpies. I know a lot of people think of them as like kind of an annoying bird species. And yes, they can be a little annoying, but they're incredibly smart.
Yeah.
All the corvids, crows and ravens,
yeah,
really, really clever birds. I think they're beautiful. And they are one of the species that can hang out for a good portion of the growing season in your yard.
I know.
Cool.
I want a crow friend.
Yeah, they are like friends. Smarter. Was it smarter than a 3rd grader or something like that? It's crazy.
Like that. I just want
really,
to be
really
brown,
clever.
shiny things.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what I want. I love that so much. Okay, so then what's your favorite plant for birds?
That's a good point. This is something I should have mentioned earlier. There are some plants that are considered keystone species that support more organisms than other ones. For an example, oaks, like Gamble oak, that's one of our species that are native to Utah, all over the place. Super important for insects, which in turn is super important for birds. Gamble oak, as an example, supports over 200 species of caterpillars.
That's so many.
Which is crazy.
That's so many.
If you have some gamble oak, maybe you let the caterpillars feed on them here and there. That's going to be an excellent food source for birds. There's also a lot of animals that will eat like the acorns or the leaves directly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just for the insects, it's for a lot of stuff. So gamble oak is probably my favorite plant.
I like it. Yeah. Well, they look so pretty in the fall.
Yeah. Oh, awesome fall color. If you look up in the Wasatch Front in fall, you see those reds and oranges. That's big tooth maple and gamble oak.
That is amazing.
Spectacular. Yep.
And they're native, so they do really well here.
Once you get them going, they don't really need much work, which is cool.
Yeah, I love it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so much fun, and I think it's so interesting. Like, I feel like there's such a theme with all of that red fruit that it is still, we can still eat it, especially if we do a process to it.
Right.
Because some of it is more astringent or maybe a little on the toxic side.
Right.
But so that was super fun. Okay, all right. Well, I think we're gonna pop off. Thank you so much, everyone, for stopping by. This was so much fun. We will be we'll be posting a recording of this. Oh, I guess one last. Do we have jays?
We have jays. Yeah, we have blue jays. We have stellar jays, which are really cool, big bird that previously didn't overwinter in Utah.
Oh.
With climate change, now they do overwinter here.
Interesting.
I won't say whether or not that's a good thing. I don't know, but the stellar jays are really, really attractive birds that we have here.
Yeah, that is so cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming on by. We'll post the recording of this for you to reference anytime. But you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.